You know, there's a few people in this world that actually sincerely believe that man has never landed a man on the moon. Or at least they like you to think they don't believe that. For whatever reason, they believe that NASA somehow perpetrated a massive public hoax in a manner reminiscent of a Hollywood production back in 1969. Unfortunately, there is a growing number of people who are ignorant of the achievements of the day, because maybe they weren't alive then, and who also are quite unwittingly gullible as a result. And so they're playing follow the leader when they come across one of these people who says that NASA faked it. Well, this video will demonstrate just how just a little common sense and a little logic and a little bit of research can easily put to rest many false claims about NASA having faked the Apollo moon missions. So those who claim that NASA faked it use a number of tactics to try to convince you to believe in their delusion. But one tactic that I've seen that is common to almost every one of their claims is they like to present information out of context. Now, there's one video that I'm including a link to in my comment bar that I urge you to watch after watching this one. But I'm going to play some clips from it. Right now I don't have the equipment to actually edit this and show you, but I'll play the audio and hopefully you'll be able to hear it. But this particular clip seems to be an emerging favorite among those who claim that NASA faked the moon landings. And I like this one because it contains some dialogue that would seem to be completely out of place to anyone who doesn't have the proper context. And it also demonstrates just how easy it is to debunk many of the naysayers' claims, especially about this particular video. But I'm going to play just the key parts of it here that the naysayers love the most, that they want you to hear. So let me play just one first clip here that they like.
Hey, Jack, you notice there's none of those guys up there holding those hoses as we go around the limb? What do you mean? I saw one just a minute ago.
So, now I've taken this completely out of context. I mean, even more so than the naysayers, because, I mean, they'll let you see the whole video clip. But I've done this just to demonstrate how effective this tactic is of taking something out of context. And I'm sure that if you don't know the full story around this video clip, you must be asking yourself right now, what the hell was that about? Who are the guys he was talking about? What hoses? What does he mean hoses? And what does this other guy mean when he says that he just saw one a minute ago? I mean, out of context, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to somebody who's seeing this for the first time. It's like, what? And if you follow the link to this video, you can see how the naysayers not only take the video out of context, but try to build their own context around it. I should add context that cannot be verified. The real context can actually be researched and verified and confirmed. But anyway, in this case, not only did they fabricate a context around it, but they dropped in a note in the description hoping that it will mislead you further and to convince you that the astronaut was actually referring to something other than hoses when he was talking about hoses. And I suppose they think this diversion works because most people watching this don't even know what he's talking about in the first place. But anyway, you see, their whole premise behind their claim is that their whole premise behind the claim that NASA faked it is that all of the Apollo moon footage was shot essentially on a movie set. And that the astronauts were wired into rigging that was suspended from rafters in the ceiling above to simulate the low gravity movements associated with hopping around on the moon. And all of this rigging is supposedly controlled by people up in the rafters, affectionately known as puppeteers. Now, this is the Achilles heel of this very claim. And I mean, for Because in order for this claim to be true, then this rigging must be present in every single shot that shows anyone walking on the moon. Which means if this were true, then all of the physics and circumstances surrounding each of the astronauts' movements on the moon would have to include and account for and coincide with this rigging. And keep in mind that while they are quick to point out lens flare and other optical artifacts in the films as evidence of light reflecting off of one of these cables, or wires as they call them, they will never point out any of the activities that would be impossible for them to perform without these wires interfering with equipment or other astronauts or with whatever it is they're interacting with. And they will also not say a word about the complete absence of the ceiling in the shots where the ascent module is launching off of the moon. Instead, they'll just simply redirect your attention to something else they think is wrong with the shot, or they'll tell you it's a miniature model. So, what is the true context of this particular video? Well, in order to get the full context, you have to gain some knowledge and understanding of the Apollo program as a whole, which really shouldn't take you very long if you just did a little reading on the subject. In fact, it helps to find information that was published before these naysayers were born. I mean, that just adds a little bit of extra credibility to it, if you know what I mean. I mean, first of all, despite whether or not any moon landing video is real or fake, this operation did not just happen out of the blue one day. I mean, it's not like they just stepped in front of the camera and started to improv everything. I mean, let's face it, if they did that, none of the moonwalks would make any sense, and we wouldn't need some misguided naysayer to tell us that it's fake. In reality, every single task that the astronauts performed on the moon was rehearsed on Earth. I mean, that's part of their training. The astronauts underwent hundreds of hours of training for their missions. So these guys spent a lot of time together, both as teammates and as friends. Some of them were friends. So not only did they know what they were talking about out there, but they also knew each other's banter. And as a result of their many hours of intense training, everybody involved, everyone on that radio knew when someone was talking about their work and when they were just kidding around. Each of the Apollo astronauts spent many hours in a simulated artificial underwater environment to simulate low gravity conditions when they trained for the tasks that they were to perform. They weren't hanging by wires, but the suits they wore in the simulations were tethered to hoses that circulated air and carried power and communication lines to their suits. And as they moved about within this aquatic environment, people above them and outside of the pool were careful to prevent the hoses from becoming damaged or entangled as they moved around. So think about it. These guys were used to having hoses attached to them throughout all of their training exercises. So now that they're finally on the moon in their real spacesuits, they suddenly find themselves free of these hoses for the first time. So John just happened to make a humorous quip about it. I mean, in a sense, I imagine it was John's way of saying, wow, I'm really here. I mean, that's how I'd feel. But beside that, even if the footage was shot in a studio, there's no way that any of these guys would slip up and use the word hoses when they really meant to say wires. And if you notice, Jack was quick on his heels with a comeback. He knew exactly what John was talking about. He didn't stop and say, hey, wait a minute, what do you mean by hoses? What are you talking about? He just did what buddies usually do. He just jumped right in to add his own contribution to the joke. And here again is the Achilles heel to the naysayers' claims that makes this so easy to debunk. Pretend for just a moment, that this was shot in a studio and these guys were suspended on wires. If that was the case, then this would have been a live shot. I mean, after all, we're watching it. We watched it, right? It's on YouTube. It's here. So if that was the case, then where were the puppeteers in this shot? Did they just suddenly decide to take a break in the middle of the shot? If this were faked, then based on the naysayers' own premise, these guys working the wires would absolutely need to be there for the astronauts to move around on the set. So then the question really becomes, how are these guys making their way around the LEM if there was nobody working the wires? Hello? The thing is, as soon as you invent an explanation for a fabricated premise based on something you do not understand, that explanation has to support the premise in all cases. Either that or your little fairy tale becomes exposed for what it really is. And in this case, there's simply no way to successfully factor in the idea that this footage could have been shot on Earth in a movie studio. Occam's razor, and come on. The only explanation that holds any water in this particular video is that these guys were actually on the moon. In fact, further support for this conclusion is found later on in the same video, where John says this. Let me see if I can find it here.
For a snack and a little water. Just took time out for a snack and a little water.
So he says, I just took time out for a snack and a little water. And ground control came back and said, John. Now, admittedly, it's inconclusive whether he actually took a snack or if he was just still kidding around, because in the Apollo 17 spacesuits, from Apollo 15 through Apollo 17, there's actually a food stick and a water tube accessible in the helmet. All he has to do is turn his head, take a bite, take a sip, and he can actually have food and water. But apparently ground control found some humor in it because they responded back, John, and you could tell these guys are kidding around because they continue to joke with each other. There's some comments in here about the landscape that they make.
Define a phrase that's a panoramic scene of beauty.
Now he comes back with,
Oh, come on now, Bob.
Come on
hey,
now,
Bob, what do you
Bob.
think of the terrain?
They're teasing Bob.
With very flat smooth.
It says the terrain looks very flat and smooth.
That's why you're an astronomer. That's why you're... Oh, well.
See, they're teasing him. That's why you're an astronomer. These guys are kidding around. Yeah, they're doing serious business, but hey, they're on the moon. You know, they're having a good time at the same time. People that try to debunk or that try to convince other people that we never went to the moon, for some reason have some mental illness that makes them want to believe that. Why? I don't know. Maybe they're insecure, thinking that they'll never be that great, or they'll never have the opportunity to be in such a great position. But all you have to do is use common sense, use your brain, do a little research, follow the clues, find out the truth. NASA was there. We went, damn it.